This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the go-to place for building your own website, which is just what I did when I used Squarespace to build a site for my production company, Galaxy Class Pictures. You can use Squarespace to create a similar looking site or one totally different, it's entirely up to you. Either way, Squarespace gives you everything you need to create a professional looking blog, portfolio, merch store, or whatever else you may be able to think of. Simply choose a template which fits your vibe and customize as much or as little as you want. While designing, you can also grab yourself a domain name to make your site as visible as possible when it goes live. Follow the link in the description to start making your own website with your own domain name and use the promo code Rowan Coleman for 10% off your first purchase. Thank you once again to Squarespace for helping me keep the lights on over here, and now on with the video. The Star Trek Mythos is famous for its optimistic vision of the future. Whereas other works of science fiction show us marching towards a haunting dystopia or retaining many of our present problems for centuries to come, Star Trek stands out as a work of science fiction which definitively states the future will be better and brighter than the present we live in, and the human race will move beyond prejudice, poverty, and war. However, when we pose the question, is humanity good? Or to be more specific, do people naturally default to their good side rather than their bad side? It's interesting to note that Star Trek, despite its optimism, actually says the answer is no.
We can admit that we're killers, but we're not going to kill today. That's all it takes. Knowing that we're not going to kill today.
Who we are as human beings is a theme Star Trek has visited and revisited numerous times over the decades. This question is either posed directly to humanity itself, or metaphorically using the fictional alien races of the Star Trek universe as stand-ins for humanity. So just to be clear, when I refer to Star Trek's view of humanity, I'm talking about it on a thematic level. Everyone in Star Trek represents humanity, even if they're an alien in the plot. All the way back in Star Trek the original series, episodes like A Taste of Armageddon and Arena clearly outline the central thesis of Star Trek's view of humanity. We are a naturally brutish and savage race, petty, violent, and tribal. However, the optimistic flourish in many of these stories is that while humans are savage, our savagery can be controlled and overcome. The key to progress is to recognize when our base drives threaten to overtake us, and have the wisdom to override these drives and instead solve our problems rationally and intellectually.
We're a killer species. It's instinctive. It's the same with you. All right. It's instinctive. The instinct can be fought. We're human beings with the blood of a million savage years on our hands. But we can stop it. We can admit that we're killers, but we're not going to kill today. That's all it takes. Knowing that we're not going to kill today.
By taking this position, Star Trek aligns itself with the views of philosopher Thomas Hobbes. In his landmark work Leviathan, he posited that humans are primarily driven by fear, resulting in a condition of war of all against all. The way to contain this war is to civilize ourselves, to be ruled by a sovereign or institutions. Dutch biologist Frans der Waal called this veneer theory, the idea that civilization is a thin veneer which will crack if enough pressure is applied, resetting us all to our supposedly natural savage state.
Let me tell you something about humans, nephew. They're a wonderful, friendly people, as long as their bellies are full and their holosuites are working. But take away their creature comforts. Deprive them of food, sleep, sonic showers. Put their lives in jeopardy over an extended period of time, and those same friendly, intelligent, wonderful people will become as nasty and as violent as the most bloodthirsty Klingon.
Humanity in Star Trek's future is no longer plagued by prejudice, poverty, and war because we have evolved beyond it. They are simply more advanced than we humans of today, who are closer to our savage roots.
People are no longer obsessed with the accumulation of things. We have eliminated hunger, want, the need for possessions. We've grown out of our infancy.
This idea of humanity evolving into a better form of itself is intrinsically tied to the idea that all societies have natural growing pains. Greed, prejudice, and conflict are the natural results of a society or race of people who haven't yet found the wisdom or intelligence to control their savage instincts. This is one of the core reasons the Prime Directive is given so much weight in Star Trek. The invention of warp drive is seen as the threshold that a civilization crosses when it's ready to evolve and overcome its brutish nature. Star Trek places all societies on the same linear timeline of advancement. Initially cave-dwelling hunter-gatherers clubbing each other over the head for scraps of food, then organised kingdoms and empires, the subjects of which believe in supernatural deities, often leading to religious wars and persecutions. But around the time a society industrializes, radical scientific and technological progress is made. While there is still conflict between the nation-states who seek to control this knowledge, eventually a society reaches out into space, discovers it is not alone in the universe, and becomes united in a common cause. However, this progress can be delicate, and there always remains the looming threat of civilization regressing to a more primal state.
Millennia ago, they abandoned their belief in the supernatural. Now you are asking me to sabotage that achievement, to send them back into the dark ages of superstition and ignorance and fear? No!
Star Trek is also fascinated by the inverse, the concept of the enlightened humans of the future grappling with power even they, in their evolved state, aren't ready for.
Before long, we'll be where it would have taken mankind millions of years of learning to reach.
And what will Mitchell learn on getting there? Will he know what to do with his power? Will he acquire the wisdom?
Please go back while you still can.
A delicate balance must be maintained. We must develop new technologies so our survival doesn't depend on the whims of nature, but we must always have wisdom when using these technologies. We cannot advance too quickly or too slowly.
But my people are not ready to accept what you represent. And Krola is the best evidence of all. We must slow down. Allow those who are like him to join us in the present.
While Star Trek doesn't believe humanity is good by nature, its optimism comes from the idea that humanity can grow. We have the wisdom and intelligence to control our savage instincts and ensure technological progress never overtakes our sense of empathy or compassion. The message Star Trek wants us as viewers to take away is optimistic and humanist from a certain point of view, but there are a couple of problems. One of the reasons the Star Trek mythos has endured for so long is because of how inspiring it can be. Fans see this brighter future and want to see it realised for real. But while it showcases that future well, when it comes to how we in the real world can help create it, Star Trek is remarkably unhelpful. Humans in the 24th century are simply more evolved. They're simply better than our present selves. By focusing on the idea that humanity needs to have the wisdom to control our savage nature and mitigate the harm of technology, it foists the responsibility of the state of the world onto individuals. Essentially, the message boils down to this: humanity just needs to get good.
You've got to do better, Senator.
Star Trek is full of positive life lessons, but oftentimes they are presented on an individual level. Let That Be Your Last Battlefield is about racism, if that wasn't clear, but the conflict is centered on the clash between Bele and Lokai. The Measure of a Man is about dehumanization, but it's centered on the conflict between Data and Bruce Maddox. Drumhead is about paranoia and abuses of power, but it's centered on the conflict between Picard and Admiral Sati, and so on. There's nothing wrong with presenting societal conflicts on this level. In fact, having characters embody perspectives on a theme is a good example of strong writing. However, the issue arises with the message a viewer is meant to take away. Racism is bad, so don't be racist. Dehumanization is bad, so don't do that. Witch hunts are bad, so don't do them. No changes are made to the power structures which supported these conflicts in the first place. No changes are even suggested. The lesson is always to simply be better. That lesson isn't wrong, but it doesn't go far enough, and isn't exactly helpful to people suffering in the present day. Like, sorry homeless guy, it sucks you're living on the street, but don't worry, in 300 years poverty won't even be a thing because everyone will have realised it's bad by then. This could be why Star Trek is often so vague about how its future society works.
We work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity.
What does that mean exactly?
It means we don't need money.
And why almost every single series in the Star Trek mythos is squarely focused on Starfleet. This was pointed out in a recent commentary of mine by friend of the channel Daniel Orrit.
It's such a weirdly world-built franchise, Star Trek, in that there's so much content, and yet, even after all this time, we've still basically only ever seen it through the lens of the big Starfleet bucket on your head, and like, there's no like it's still not really world built. Like outside of the books and the beta canon and stuff like that. Like it's bizarre that a franchise can exist for so long and have so much content, and we still don't even really know what NCC stands for. And like, there's no like, and it's like there's no money, but we won't get into that. Like, we won't detail anything. Like certain parts of it are exhaustively detailed, and loads of it is very, very vague, and it's a bit odd in that respect. Like, I feel like something like Star Wars basically just like flatly increases in complexity across the board as it goes along, and like you can go and find out what like the architecture looks like on Corellia or how its local government works or whatever. Like, they actually do fill everything out with information. Whereas in Star Trek, it's like really, really basic stuff about the nation and the setting is just not said at all ever. And it's just the life on the ship is the main lens for everything.
More commentaries like this, exclusive to Patreon for free, by the way. The bright future of Star Trek has no currency-based economic system at all. Replicators can give anyone anything they could ever want, and energy is abundant. But how is this society organized? How is the government elected? What kind of powers does that government have? I know I'm dangerously close to getting political here, but these are important questions to ask. Is the future society seen in Star Trek capitalist, communist, anarchist, syndicalist, or some new kind of ist we haven't thought of yet? Star Trek has never been able to answer these questions because its themes and ideas are only ever communicated on an individual level rather than a systemic one. And it all stems from the idea that the way to that brighter future is simply for human beings to be better, to control our savage nature, an idea based on the assumption that humanity is inherently savage by nature. Another assumption made by this thesis is the idea that all societies evolve along the same lines, cavemen to peasants to workers to liberated space explorers. However, recent anthropological research has revealed this isn't the case. As illustrated by this excellent Trexpertise video, which I'd highly recommend checking out, recent studies have found societies develop along individual paths depending on context. As Trexpertise relays in his video, the Inca Empire, for example, had one of the most extensive road networks in the world, far surpassing many of those in Europe, and yet the Inca barely used wheels. Their terrain was simply so mountainous that piling stuff into a wheeled cart would only make transporting goods harder, not easier. Yet the invention and mass adoption of the wheel, like warp drive in Star Trek, is often held up as a benchmark invention, a signal that a society has reached a threshold of progress, when in reality it's not. Again, watch the Trexpertise video, it's really good. This idea is also seemingly contradicted by Star Trek's lore to a certain extent. Humanity invented the warp drive, yes, but the subsequent progress made by humanity in ushering in that brighter future was in large part thanks to the influence of the Vulcans. Without the Vulcans guiding humanity, bestowing and withholding certain technologies depending on whether the Vulcans thought humans were ready or not, would Earth have become the utopia it's shown to be? Then there's the Vulcans themselves. Though they invented warp travel centuries ahead of humans, their society remained largely stagnant. The Klingons, meanwhile, used warp drive primarily for conquest, giving in to their savage natures. Despite being technologically far ahead of humanity, the Vulcans and the Klingons quickly fell behind in other ways. Which brings us to the elephant in the room. Starfleet is kinda racist. Now, hold on, let me clarify here. I'm not trying to make some shallow hot take with the bold and provocative idea that the good guys are actually the bad guys. Ooh, crazy. I'm not about to make out that Star Trek as a mythos, as a story, is inherently racist in its themes and messages. Of course it isn't. I mean, just look at Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. You can't get less subtle than that. Star Trek's heart is absolutely in the right place. The entire mythos from the original pilot to the latest episode was produced to be a progressive, thought-provoking, optimistic and hopeful story, and it should be commended for that. However, just like the scientific process Star Trek idolizes, it should update its conclusions when met with new data. Unfortunately, Star Trek has been operating on some outdated assumptions concerning biology, history, and anthropology. Again, not out of malice or willful ignorance, this was simply the most up-to-date information available when Star Trek was created, and the writers simply extrapolated from there. However, these extrapolations have unintentionally created some implications and connotations which go against the progressive message the mythos seeks to embody. I'm not saying it's a total failure or you're a bad person if you're a fan. That would be like punching myself in the face if I was. Okay? Are we on the same page? Good. So let's sum up the ideas Star Trek has communicated thus far. First, humanity is savage by nature, but through our wisdom and intelligence we can control that nature, overcome our base instincts, and evolve into better versions of ourselves, paving the way for a better and brighter future. Second, every civilization has growing pains like humanity does. At first, our savage nature gets the better of us, leading to conflict and suffering, but over time, as a society becomes more advanced and the people within it learn to control themselves better, civilization becomes stable and united. Taken at face value, there's a disturbing implication from these two ideas. The implication is that within the Star Trek universe, humanity is, by this standard, superior to everyone else. Humanity is the only race in Star Trek to properly balance its wisdom and intelligence with its aggressive, savage nature.
His negative side, which you call hostility, lust, violence. We see here indications that it is his negative side which makes him strong. That his evil side, if you will, properly controlled and disciplined, is vital to his strength.
In contrast, the Vulcans have overcorrected with their doctrine of logic, resulting in a stagnant society. The Klingons, meanwhile, have let their savage nature get the better of them, resulting in a society embroiled in endless conflict. Because of this naturalist argument, the implication is that the various races in Star Trek behave the way they do because of their biology. The Klingons are naturally bloodthirsty.
Would you agree that one of the things that makes a Klingon warrior so formidable is his predatory instinct, his bloodlust, if you will?
I'd agree with that.
And the Ferengi are naturally greedy.
We were warned about the Ferengi at the Academy.
Warned about Ferengi, were you?
That's right.
Oh my god! He cannot be more Ferengi! The big ears, the beady eyes, the greedy thing they do with their hands. Ferengi are the most untrustworthy race in the galaxy. He probably just wants to lure us over there so he can mug us!
Starfleet characters spotting an alien and treating them differently because they're alien happens several times in the mythos.
I am Rondon, you despicable melanoid slime worm!
Who do you think you're bullying? You bumped into me. It was your mistake. You were at fault.
Do you want this to become violent?
Friend, I like you.
When he raised his hand, I saw that it was webbed, the sign of a Zaldan. Zaldans are infuriated by courtesy. They view it as a form of phony social behavior designed to cover true feelings.
Now, I get that this is just writing efficiency for the most part, but it's kind of fucked up how often Star Trek paints an entire species with the same brush. The insert race or insert profession is a common refrain in Star Trek dialogue.
This looks like the remains of a pheromonic sensor. They're known to be favored by Flaxian assassins. And it just so happens, a Flaxian came aboard the station just this morning.
In a way, the first episode of Star Trek Discovery confronts this very idea.
Considering your background, I would think you the last person to make assumptions based on race.
With respect, it would be unwise to confuse race and culture.
Whenever the Vulcans crossed paths with Klingons, the Vulcans fired first. They said hello in a language the Klingons understood. Violence brought respect. Respect brought peace.
Captain Georgiou and Admiral Anderson refuse to fire first, even when it's obvious the Klingons have clearly shown up for a fight. And even during the battle, Anderson tries calling for a ceasefire. Why? Because Georgiou and Anderson feel, consciously or otherwise, that their moral code is the right one. Everyone should want peace, and if they don't, they aren't as evolved as us. Again, this is not the intention of the episode, but taken along with how these themes have been explored in Star Trek before, that is the implication. Deep Space Nine even brought this up directly through the character of Michael Eddington.
Nobody leaves paradise. Everyone should want to be in the Federation. Hell, you even want the Cardassians to join. You're only sending them replicators because one day they can take their rightful place on the Federation Council.
Deep Space Nine also further complicates matters with the introduction of Section 31. Once again, if we take Star Trek's reasoning, that humans are naturally savage and can only advance by controlling their nature, then Section 31's existence is fully justified. Humanity and the Federation at large can only live in a utopia because Section 31 is there to do the dirty work that needs doing. It's a philosophy based on the idea that people cannot be trusted, that left to their own devices, people will give in to their savage nature, and an organization like Section 31 will always be needed to keep the peace. What makes Section 31 such a disturbing idea is that there's never really a retort to this philosophy. Sisko et al. Dislike Section 31's methods, but they never definitively discount the idea that their existence has been necessary. Who knows how close the Federation has come to complete collapse, only to be saved by Section 31 working in the shadows. However, there is a counter-argument to this philosophy, and it is one which the creative minds behind Star Trek should perhaps consider adopting.
And what he might say with irony, I say with conviction. What a piece of work is man.
In his book Humankind: A Hopeful History, which I'm half ripping off for this video, Dutch historian Rutger Bregman brings up the work of philosopher Jacques Rousseau, whose core argument is the ideological counter to Thomas Hobbes. In the essay which made him famous, he says, "The first man who, after enclosing a piece of ground, took it into his head to say, 'This is mine,' and found people simple enough to believe him, was the true founder of civil society. How many crimes, how many wars, how many murders, how many misfortunes and horrors would that man have saved the human species who, by pulling up the stakes and filling in the ditches, should have cried to his fellows, 'Be sure not to listen to this impostor. You are lost if you forget that the fruits of the earth belong equally to us all, and underneath the earth itself, to nobody.'"
So, what does this mean?
Essentially what Rousseau is saying here is that humans are not naturally selfish or aggressive or savage, but it's the systems which reward that kind of behaviour which are responsible for the strife in society. After all, how can the evils of politics, religion and war be illustrative of human nature when these things are not natural? According to Rousseau, the evils of the world are the result of the corruption of human nature, not its expression. Now, when it comes to arguing in favour of human goodness, there's a lot to cover. There's our negativity bias, which makes it seem as though the world is a crime-infested, war-torn hell always on the brink of collapse, despite the actual state of the world being far better than most people think. There are famous experiments which supposedly prove humanity's dark nature being either outright fraudulent or misinterpreted, and the reason why humans became the dominant species on the planet being because we are the most social life forms on Earth rather than the most aggressive or competitive. As I said, it's a lot, and if you're interested to know more, I'll once again recommend Humankind: A Hopeful History. I'm not being paid to say that or anything, it's just a really good book. But if Star Trek dropped the ball in its portrayal of human nature, there is a popular science fiction mythos which gets it right. Star Trek.
I don't think I understand you. I can understand your confusion.
Whenever the concept of innate human goodness is brought up, cynics will be quick to point to war as proof of humanity's savage nature. But is this really the result of human nature? In A Taste of Armageddon, both Anan 7 and Captain Kirk refer to the act of killing as instinctual.
We're a killer species. It's instinctive. It's the same with you. All right. It's instinctive.
However, according to research dating back to World War II, it turns out that it's actually incredibly difficult to convince two human beings to try and kill one another. The phenomenon of soldiers deliberately aiming too high to avoid hitting their target is well known from the book Men Against Fire by military historian S.L.A. Marshall. The trauma felt by soldiers is not just because of what was done to them by the enemy, it's what they were made to do to the enemy in the first place. The very act of marching to war and going into battle goes against our fundamental human nature.
One of the women threw me a phaser, and I fired. The man just incinerated, there before my eyes. I'd never killed anything before. It's not you I hate, Cardassian. I hate what I became because of you.
This is what makes the Jem'Hadar so terrifying in Deep Space Nine, because they have no concept of the sanctity of life. The Jem'Hadar are brutally efficient because they will kill anyone and anything at the drop of a hat if told to do so, and feel nothing afterwards. It's telling that this trait had to be artificially instilled into the Jem'Hadar. Killing isn't even a natural instinct for them, but something which had to be engineered by the founders. Klingons don't even like killing and death as much as their culture would suggest. Despite Klingons insisting that death in glorious battle is worthwhile and honourable, they still mourn the loss of their comrades and do their best to preserve the lives of their soldiers. This is the main conflict between General Martok and Chancellor Gowron in DS9's final season. Gowron needlessly throws away Klingon lives in unwinnable battles to make Martok look bad. If Klingons were genuinely as bloodthirsty as they claim, if they were naturally predisposed to relishing death in glorious battle, then surely Martok wouldn't feel the way he does. On some level, Martok, Worf, and most other Klingons understand the sanctity of life. The social bonds between their fellow Klingons supersede their supposedly natural instinct for killing. This storyline illustrates how this naturalist argument can be weaponized by those in power. We're told Klingons have an innate bloodlust, and it is an honourable act for a Klingon to embrace this nature and seek glorious battle. Winning great victories or dying heroically makes a Klingon a credit to their species. Therefore, the descendants of great conquerors or venerated heroes are said to be those of noble blood. However, it's made clear in TNG and DS9 that the House of Duras and Chancellor Gowron did not attain power through winning great victories or making heroic sacrifices. They are simply members of the nobility. Their power is evidence of their honour, an honour which was achieved by their ancestors embracing their Klingon nature and seeking battle. It's a circular argument. They deserve their power because they have power. To say otherwise is to question their honour, to question the very essence of what makes them Klingon. The way forward for the Klingon people is to abandon the notion that waging war is simply in their nature, and those who have taken the most spoils of war are the most honourable, because more often than not, this naturalist argument in favour of the power structures of the Empire only helps the worst of Klingon society.
Who was the last leader of the High Council that you respected? And how many times have you had to cover up the crimes of Klingon leaders because you were told that it was for the good of the Empire? The truth is, you have been willing to accept a government that you know is corrupt. Gowron is just the latest example.
It also stifles progress in other areas like science.
I don't think Klingons regard scientists very highly. She always seemed a little defensive.
And blinds them to other ways in which they could help their society.
You said there was an enemy for us to fight.
They are attempting to plant their fields before the sun sets. Time is their enemy. We should help them defeat it.
And just as the Klingons are not naturally predisposed to waging war, the Ferengi are not naturally predisposed to being greedy. It's worth noting that within Ferengi culture, being good at business is framed as an instinct. A Ferengi either has the lobes or they don't.
My father is a mechanical genius. He could have been chief engineer of a starship if he'd had the opportunity. But he went into business like a good Ferengi.
If you're not good at business, then you aren't a real Ferengi, because it's natural for a Ferengi to be greedy. Once again, arguing that Ferengi society is a natural result of Ferengi instincts only benefits a small few. It's clear there's a large contingent of Ferengi society who don't want things to be this way. I mean, for God's sake, there's an episode where Rom literally quotes Karl Marx.
Workers of the world, unite! You have nothing to lose but your chains.
But if there are two alien races in Star Trek which epitomize Rousseau's ideas, they are the Cardassians and Bajorans. Unlike the Vulcans, Klingons, or Ferengi, neither the Cardassians or Bajorans embody a single trait in Star Trek. They are shown to be multifaceted people with complex societies and rich cultures. True, the Cardassian nation has been a tyrannical empire for most of Star Trek history, and their military is responsible for countless atrocities, but this is never shown to be the result of some biological imperative. The Cardassian Empire is ruled absolutely by the military, and its citizenry is under constant surveillance from the Obsidian Order. The Cardassian justice system is always rigged in the state's favour, and the ordinary citizen has no voice in their government. Under these oppressive circumstances, it's easy to see why so many Cardassians would rather drink the Kool-Aid and do as they're told, rather than speak out. But free of these power structures, the Cardassians show themselves to be, more often than not, sociable, loyal, and even kind. The Cardassian occupation of Bajor was justified by rhetoric and enforced through violence.
From the moment we arrived on Bajor, it was clear that we were the superior race. Militarily, technologically, culturally. We were almost a century ahead of them in every way.
But despite the efforts of the Central Command, many Cardassians still felt that deep down what they did to the Bajoran people was wrong.
You didn't commit those crimes, and you couldn't stop them. You were only one man.
Oh, no, don't you see? I have to be punished. We all have to be punished.
Why are you doing this?
For Cardassia. Cardassia will only survive if it stands in front of Bajor and admits the truth. My trial will force Cardassia to acknowledge its guilt. And we're guilty, all of us. My death is necessary.
What you're asking for is another murder. Enough good people have already died.
Did I mention Deep Space Nine is the best Star Trek show, by the way? Likewise, the Bajorans are fundamentally good people at heart, but the power structures within their society are sometimes taken advantage of by extremists like Kai Wynn. The way the Bajoran religion is handled in Deep Space Nine is another example of that show's exceedingly strong writing. Whereas TNG adhered to the linear societal evolution concept, which frames any belief in the supernatural as barbaric, Deep Space Nine treats religious belief with more respect.
With all this stuff about the Celestial Temple and the wormhole, it's dumb.
No, it's not. You've got to realize something, Jake. For over 50 years, the one thing that allowed the Bajorans to survive the Cardassian occupation was their faith. My point is, it's a matter of interpretation. It may not be what you believe, but that doesn't make it wrong.
We are shown many times how Bajorans are helped by their religion, and told how it was a uniting force during the Cardassian occupation. However, we are also shown how their religion can be abused by those in power, and used to justify violent enforcement of the status quo.
He fell from the second level. His neck was broken on impact.
Did anyone see it happen?
I pushed him. His family name is Muta. Their Dajara is unclean.
You killed him because of his Dajara?
I had to.
Again, it's as Rousseau said, good-natured people being corrupted by the artificial systems imposed on them by the few who would benefit from them.
Give yourself over to the prophets.
I'll do whatever it takes to make myself worthy in their eyes.
Everything will change once you step down as Kai.
Step down? I don't understand. Why would I do that?
Eminence, being in power, is what led you on the wrong path.
This is why I think Star Trek could stand to rethink its assessment of humanity. Is the way forward to a brighter future dependent on us all individually learning to control our savage nature, or is it achieved by everyone working together to create systems which bring out the goodness inherent in us all? The former leaves the road murky. When exactly do we know when we're all evolved enough to create that better future? Do we just have to wait around until the Vulcans show up to help us out? But if we embrace the latter, if we believe that we already have everything we need to create a brighter future, we can be active in making it a reality. The way forward is much clearer. If Star Trek is to continue inspiring future generations, the choice of which philosophy to embrace seems obvious. Thank you for watching. If you like my videos, be sure to like, subscribe and share, and make sure to hit the bell icon to stay up to date with all of my new uploads. If you want to help the channel grow, join my Patreon or YouTube members using the links down below. There you can see videos early as well as some exclusive content. Speaking of which, I'd like to quickly thank all of my patrons and members who are now appearing on screen. With an ultra thanks to Bano, Dent the Air, Extreme Streamers, Tom, Dusk, Colin Camille, Patrick Fleming, Matthew Camille, Ed Mark Starr, Dylan Thomas, Lilac Yane, Howard Craig Akervik, and Caging G. Have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.